Ralph Nader is at it again. Why do Americans give away so much control to corporations? The corporate Borg is sucking the ready availability of the good life, decent, secure livelihoods assured by our collective self-reliance and the freedom to shape our future out of our political economy. Ralph seems to think that the resources of this vastly wealthy country belong to all of us. It's a very dangerous idea, Ralph. The caption under this photo reads, "Why have we handed over the enormous assets we own to this expanding corporate state?" I remember as a kid growing up that the fiercely independent grown-ups in my life were afraid that the government would own everything and that the people wouldn't own anything. My dad was always afraid of being taxed. He felt that that took away his sovereignty. And that idea actually has always made sense to me. If it's our money, why do we have to give it to the government? But as I grew up, I started to understand that when the government is owned by a few wealthy assholes, that's what we really should be afraid of. What my dad never has understood is that the government could be us. We the people, could be the government. I grew up in the state of Oregon, but then after many moves, I ended up in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I thought to myself, Commonwealth, that's a pretty cool word. Commonwealth. But what happens then to fiercely independent people? They have wealth, but only if they understand that they share it with everyone else. Over the years, the wheels have kept turning. I've considered this because I'm still fiercely independent, but yet I also don't mind sharing. And I've also noticed the tendency of assholes to rise to power over time. What Ralph is pointing out is that we humans tend to give up control to these assholes all too readily. And it doesn't matter if it's communism or capitalism, the people still end up getting the shaft in the end if we don't understand how to collectively use our power. George Orwell pointed this out very well in Animal Farm. Instead of a commonwealth, the humans in the story simply were replaced by pigs. And that's where we are right now, people. We are being run by pigs. Greedy, corporate, foul-smelling pigs. And if the people rise up and take the pigs out of power, what is going to stop some new form of pig from coming into the power vacuum? Yes, we need to riot and strike. Yes, we need to take the assholes out of power, but we also need to work on our collective understanding of how to collectively govern ourselves. And this is where the idea of the commons comes in. David Bollier is a commons person. He understands it and has written extensively about it. And so we'll end the show with a little snippet of his ideas about what it means. The commons, that is. So let's start with Ralph and end with David. That will be a good 1-2 punch. The American people own most of the wealth, private and public, and most of the information in the country. The top 1% do not. The American people have most of the power in the country. The top 1% do not. These assertions may surprise you because the top 1% and the giant corporations work overtime to control what you own. This means they do not have to seize what you own so long as their control provides them with both riches and power over you. This is me talking. In the French language, the word vous, V-O-U-S, means you. It can mean a collective you, y'all, or it can mean you, one person. Now, Ralph is speaking to us as though he's speaking to individuals, and he says you own, and you have the power. But he's not talking to you as an individual. He's talking to you as a collective. And this is a sticky point. So if you don't understand that as we keep going through Ralph's article, it will confuse you. Back to Ralph. Let's spell this out with specifics. Our Constitution starts with the words, we the people. It doesn't start with we the corporations, or we the Congress, or we the super rich. The sovereign authority under the Constitution is us. We the people are the bosses. But we give our power away to the big boys who run the big companies that control most of our elected politicians. The politicians in turn proceed to corrupt our elections with campaign money, gerrymandering, deceitful ads, voter obstructions, and a totally dominant two-party duopoly. This corporate state destroys competitive democracy, which would give our votes meaning, choices, and effectiveness. This is me talking. It's interesting that he uses the words competitive democracy, which sounds a little bit like capitalism that's completely free. And by free, I mean free of monopolies and free of rich assholes getting control of everything. Back to Ralph. Shouldn't we be discussing why, when we own the vast federal public land, 1/3 of America, and the vast public airwaves, do we give control of these resources to corporations every day of the year to profit from at our expense? We give the television and radio stations that block our voices free control and use of the airwaves 24/7. We receive very little in royalties from the energy, mining, timber, and grazing companies extracting huge wealth from our federal lands. We send our tax dollars to Washington, D.C., and the federal government gives trillions of these dollars to companies in the form of subsidies and bailouts. Well, Ralph, if you understood MMT, you'd see that you're not quite right there, but we'll let it pass for now. Our taxes are not given directly to the assholes. The assholes are given the money by the Fed, who simply spends the money into existence. This pernicious little misunderstanding pervades the writing and thinking of a lot of very smart people, so we have to call it out whenever we see it. Back to Ralph. Trillions of dollars are devoted to government research and development, R&D, which has built or expanded private companies. These include such industries as aerospace, pharmaceuticals, military weapons, computers, internet, biotechnology, nanotechnology, and containerization. Our taxpayer-funded R&D is essentially given away free to these for-profit businesses. We, the people, receive no royalties nor profit-sharing returns on these public investments. Worse, we pay gouging prices for drugs and other products developed with our money. He said with our tax dollars, which isn't technically true. We have trillions of dollars in savings and retirement money placed in giant mutual and pension funds. The managers of these institutions make big profits by investing your money in the stock and bond markets. If you controlled these trillions of dollars in stocks and bonds that you own, that is, if there was real shareholder and bondholder power, you would control the ownership of all the big companies and turn the tables on the big bosses. Polls show a big majority of people think big business has too much power and control over us. Nonetheless, we regularly give these plutocrats control over what we own. Ralph's use of the word "we" here is not confusing, but the word "you" could be. You would control the ownership of all the big companies only if you could get a lot of other yous to agree with you as to how that should be done. Democracy, for that reason, can be messy. It isn't merely you deciding. You have to get some cooperation from other people, also called you. We own our personal information, yet we give it totally free to the likes of Facebook, Google, Instagram, and YouTube, etc., so they can make trillions of dollars selling data on what we buy, what we like, what we think, and what we're addicted to in the marketplace. The advertisers then pester us 24/7 and even betray our trust. Imagine Alexa or Siri eavesdropping in our homes and businesses. High-tech companies should not be privy to our personal information. This is me talking. I've got my cell phone sitting right next to me, and if I speak the right words, it wakes up and starts to talk back to me. But you know that she's listening all the time. And you also know that the CIA has admitted in court that they're listening to us all the time through these technologies. After 9/11 is when all this started to get crazy. So if I do too good of a job of rabble-rousing, I'm sure the powers will hear about it. But if I disappear, you know that the collective needs to keep on going in the right direction. Back to Ralph. Unfortunately, giving companies our personal information from which they profit immensely and gouge and penalize us profusely started long ago. The moment we took out credit cards, for example, we began to lose control of our money and our privacy. With the internet, companies are generating new payment system controls with their dictatorial fine print agreements and never-ending additional surcharges driven by their greedy overreaches. People spend lots of time just trying to get through to these companies for refunds, adjustments, corrections, and simple answers to their questions. Why have we handed over the enormous assets we own to this expanding corporate state? Why have we surrendered to statism or corporate socialism? The corporate Borg is sucking the ready availability of the good life, decent, secure livelihoods assured by our collective self-reliance, and the freedom to shape our future out of our political economy. Why are we allowing the United States, this rich land of ours, to have so many impoverished, powerless people dominated by the few? With ever greater concentration or powers under corrupt Trumpism and its corporate supremacists, control of our lives is getting worse. Ralph. Why are you saying corrupt Trumpism and not corrupt neoliberalism? This corporate fascism has been going on for at least 40 years. Why do you call it Trumpism? And why do the editors at Common Dreams allow this? It's almost like you're coming right out and telling us to vote for Joe Biden. And that's not going to help with this control of our lives getting worse. Biden is the deep state. Biden is Siri and Alexa. Biden is the CIA and the FBI. Biden is imperialism. Biden is racism. And you're not going to hear that, folks, on the corporate airwaves. And not only that, you're not going to hear it on Common Dreams, which is increasingly becoming a sheepdog organization. Now, Ralph raises an interesting point next. He says that civic skills and practices are not taught in schools. This is a big fucking deal. We don't have certified plumbers and electricians and carpenters coming out of our high schools anymore. We don't have mechanics. We're always going to need mechanics in this country to keep the machinery going after we don't have jobs anymore. I have to agree that this is an evil, insidious problem. Teaching people how to do things as opposed to teaching them what gets taught in colleges nowadays is a travesty. Used to be that we went to college because we needed to learn how to think. But that's not necessarily happening anymore. The practice of removing vocational training from public high schools is an act of evil. By not providing these civic skills in public settings, they are effectively disarming us. And then when we don't come out of high school with these skills, they make us pay for them and they make us go into debt for them. And then we start out our lives with our gonads in their tight grip. And I want to make it clear that gonads include ovaries. So they've got us all by the gonads right off the bat because we're all deeply in debt. And then we have to spend a lot of our time and effort simply repaying this debt rather than getting ahead in life for ourselves and for our families. I can't think of any non-evil reason to remove vocational training from high schools. If you know any good articles about that, maybe by Mike Rao, feel free to post those in the comments section under this video. And if you're listening on podcasts, just send me a Facebook message. I put my Facebook information underneath the podcast. Back to Ralph. It starts with us being indoctrinated into being powerless. Civic skills and practice are not taught in schools. This leads to the people not taking control of Congress, only 535 of them. We are allowing elections and debates to ignore raising these basic democratic issues of who owns what and who should control our Commonwealth. David Bollier and his colleagues are working to have adults and students learn about the commons, owned by all of us, and the few examples of people sharing in our Commonwealth. Through the Alaska Permanent Fund, every Alaskan gets about $2,000 a year from the royalties oil companies pay for taking the people's oil from that state. Yes, it's the people's oil. It's not the oil company's oil. If you're interested in reading further about the commons we own but do not control, go to bollier.org and breakingthroughpower.org. It's in our hands. So I went to breakingthroughpower.org, and it's basically an advertisement for Ralph Nader's book, Breaking Through Power. It's easier than we think. In Breaking Through Power, Nader draws from a lifetime waging and often winning David versus Goliath battles against big corporations and the United States government. I noticed when I scrolled down to the bottom of the page that they have us viewing the spring 2016 agenda, so it may be good, Ralph, if you updated your web page. So David Bollier's page is very interesting. He's got cogent material about David Graeber, may he rest in peace. I've mentioned David before in his books, The Utopia of Rules, Bullshit Jobs, Toward an Anthropological Theory of Value, The False Coin of Our Own Dreams is one of his lesser-known early works. Graeber definitely died too soon. He was on to some really big ideas. I also noticed as I scrolled through this website that everyone is talking about the commons, the urban commons, effective labor in community forests, so community, commons, commoning, the frontier beyond open access publishing, commoning, Black Commons, community land trusts and reparations, the Great Lakes Commons, and a podcast called Frontiers of Commoning. So what the hell is the commons? David says, if you're coming to the commons for the first time, it can be difficult to grok the idea because there are so many different ways to understand the commons. That's because the commons is not so much a fixed, universal thing as a general concept describing durable, dynamic sets of social relationships for managing resources. All sorts of resources: digital, urban, natural, indigenous, rural, cultural, scientific, to use some crude categories. The key idea here, as I've been digging into this, is the idea of social relationships. The way we relate to each other is key. So the fiercely independent grown-ups of my youth, I don't know that they would grok this right away. I don't know about you, but I've never gotten myself to use the word grok in a sentence that I made up myself before that. The Commons, short and sweet. This was written in 2011. I am always trying to figure out how to explain the idea of the Commons to newcomers who find it hard to grasp. In preparation for a talk that I gave at the Co-Forum for Human Security near Montreux, Switzerland, I came up with a fairly short overview, which I have copied below. I think it gets to the nub of things. The Commons is a social system for the long-term stewardship of resources that preserves shared values and community identity. A self-organized system by which communities manage resources, both depletable and replenishable, with minimal or no reliance on the market or on the state. So when Ralph Nader talks about statism, this is his answer to avoid statism. The wealth that we inherit or create together and must pass on, undiminished or enhanced, to our children. Our collective wealth includes the gifts of nature, civic infrastructure, cultural works and traditions, and knowledge. A sector of the economy and life that generates value in ways that are often taken for granted and often jeopardized by the market state. There is no master inventory of commons because a commons arises whenever a given community decides it wishes to manage a resource in a collective manner with special regard for equitable access, use, and sustainability. And I'll break in here and say that that's the opposite of some sneaky, conniving shyster who figures out how to manage a resource for his or her own benefit. In this system, you're not looking for an angle or a way to exploit other people. You're not looking for freedom to bully and exploit other people. You're looking for a way to benefit and lift up everyone in your common community. So I'll end with this thought. If we do figure out how to rise up against the assholes at the top and overthrow them, we will end up like George Orwell's Animal Farm unless we figure out some way to think collectively about the common good of everyone. The pigs in the story obviously didn't figure it out. What I wonder is if the sheep had gained power, if they wouldn't have just turned into a different kind of pig. Unless we understand this idea of the commons, we will not be fit to govern ourselves. Anarchists dream of us being able to govern ourselves without the need of the state. And this won't happen unless we stop dreaming of the day that we can stick it to our fellow friends and neighbors and figure out some way to exploit them all. The people who most benefit from our acting like sheep are not going to want us to hear this. We already know that they don't want us to publicly learn how to become carpenters and plumbers. They want to charge us for it. So it's probably safe to say that they don't want us to figure out how to work collectively to cut them out of the deal. Again and again, it all comes down to information, the control of information. Unless we as a commons can wrest control of information away from the few assholes at the top, we're just stuck. There's no way to solve the problems that we face without a solid educational, informational system. Ralph says that the airwaves belong to us, and in theory, the internet belongs to us. When we rise up and overthrow the powers that are now in place, we also need to remember not to become pigs. We need to insist that the commonwealth is shared by all of us in terms of information as well as in terms of other resources. So that really shows you why you need to share information like this. This kind of information is dangerous to the oligarchs. And for that reason, we need to do everything in our power to make sure everyone we know hears it.